There's a certain song that is engraved in my mind and on my heart and soul, and I hope it never wears off. I probably first heard it at church camp as a little kid because when I was a little kid, that song would have been considered way too modern and kind of hippy dippy ish to sing in a proper church service. It just so happens that you heard Tyler sing it wonderfully just now. They'll know we are Christians by our love, also known as We Are One in the Spirit. It was written back in the 1960s by Peter Schultes, who was a priest at that time. His inspiration for writing it was the Gospel of John, chapter 13, verse 35, where Jesus tells his disciples, "By this will everyone know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." By the 1980s, Peter Schultes left the priesthood, got married, became a business consultant, and wrote a best-selling business management book called The Team Handbook, which some magazine included on its list of the best 100 business books of all time. The whole point of the song Peter wrote is a no-brainer, that we can talk all day about how we treat each other with forgiveness and loving kindness and grace, but it's really how we actually behave that matters. That's where the rubber hits the road. Behaving like a Christian means we will work with each other, that we will walk hand in hand and side by side, and that we will guard everyone's dignity and we will protect everyone's pride. So it's about actively loving others, and one outcome of that will be how obvious that love is to everyone else. You can be known by your temper, or by your fears, or by your criticisms, or by your pessimism, or by your need to be important or right, or you could be known by your behavior that mirrors the love that Jesus himself lived out. Today we heard some other familiar words, at least I hope they're familiar to you. Meg Gambino read them for us from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13. Now, if that chapter had its own title, it might very well be called "They'll Know We Are Christians by Our Love," I think. Sometimes, words like those we can hear so often, we can have the edges sort of worn down by repetition. I've heard 1 Corinthians 13 so many times at weddings, at funerals, and I've seen those words so often on greeting cards and in framed needlework. So I don't know about you, but the hard work and the radical claims those words are making on us and on how we behave, those words can run the risk of becoming a kind of spiritual elevator music. We hum along and a positive sentimental feeling can wash over us, but we might not find any reason to actually live out those words. Matter of fact, this is one of those Bible passages that when we do hear it, it can feel like a nice pat on the back, a way to go, rather than a kick in the seat of the pants. And it was intended to be a kick, not a sentimental affirmation. But we can lose that sense, especially because our perception of our own behavior is that if we ever do behave unlovingly, it's justified and very rare. It's tough love, we say, telling it like it is. But Paul talks about patience, and we're always patient, right? Paul talks about not being envious or boastful or arrogant or rude, and, well, of course, we would never do any of those things, right? Clearly. So, what I'd like to do for a moment is to recast this passage, just to put some bite back into it. You can think of it as the New Revised David Green version. If I can speak and sing so wonderfully as to melt your heart by the beauty of my words, but if I don't love, then I'm nothing more than fingernails on a chalkboard. If I'm uncommonly wise, brimming with insight that illuminates the minds of many but do not love, then I'm a total waste of your time. If I apply myself with discipline to my tasks and make contributions to my field of endeavor that changes the world, but I'm lacking in love, I might as well not exist because I'm just padding my own resume. If I reject the sickness and division in our culture and live by values that are honest, pure, responsible, and right, but I fail to love, then my values don't mean squat to the people who need it most. If I pray daily, dive deeply into spiritual thoughts and practices, give generously, and volunteer to help others, but I don't share love, none of that other stuff really amounts to more than making me feel good about myself. If I'm totally committed to justice and human rights, if I'm an advocate for the oppressed and I work for peace, but I don't demonstrate love, I amount to nothing. Because I haven't grounded my reason for pursuing peace and justice in any kind of ethical or moral code, which is what love really is in practice. So I guess that's why my version of 1 Corinthians 13 is not a popular thing to read at weddings. Still, it is exactly what Paul's driving at. And it's super important to remember who Paul is writing this letter to. It's not to the general public, but people who go to church. He's addressing Christians, people like you and me, who share a community to worship together and do ministry together and to behave like Jesus together. He's talking to the average church member, but especially to those of us in positions of responsibility for the care and nurture and mission of the church. But being only human, they were also people who were different in many ways. They differed in their priorities, their temperaments, their interests, their various skill sets. They even differed in their particular beliefs. You know, the crazy idea that all Christians have to believe exactly the same thing in order to belong to a church, that didn't come along until a few hundred years later. But, you know, that's a whole other sermon for another time. Paul affirmed for the members of that church in Corinth and for every Christian church since then that every individual had unique gifts and talents given by God. And he affirmed that that kind of diversity was a good thing, that God made us unique on purpose because the world is diverse. Finally, he affirmed that whatever gifts and talents and interests and priorities and beliefs anyone might have, if love is not in any of that, it adds up to nothing. In other words, you might be fantastic at what you do in the church or just in your life beyond the church. You might have dedication and skill, and you might really be working to make a difference in the world. But without love as the motivation, and without love as the guiding light, without love as the reason you do what you do, then ultimately you got to ask yourself, what's the point? Because without love, I'm just doing this stuff to please myself, to make myself feel important, to gain recognition, and none of those things are of any ultimate importance, and none of them last. Now that might sound kind of harsh, but Paul's point is to remind us that in the end, nothing else but love will last. Everything else we do, and I mean everything, has its limits, and it comes to an end. Even the best things we know and that we do, all of our good gifts, our talents, our skills, eventually hit a wall. Whatever we think we know is absolute is incomplete, fragmentary, imperfect. Only love breaks through that inevitable wall. So why not? While we still have life and breath and gifts and talents in each other and our neighbors to share them with, invest our energies and our efforts and our brains and our hearts with love, with that one element that is more powerful than anything and that never dies. Why not live as if that truth about love is true? A few years ago, I heard a story on NPR produced by Chad Campbell that I would like to share with you. On the one hand, it's not a story at all about a church or about how Christians behave or about how we're known or how we love. But on the other hand, it describes those things perfectly. Here it goes. About a week after Glenda and Rafi Savitz welcomed their daughter Samantha into the world, they learned that she was deaf. Glenda said she was the first deaf person we'd ever known, so obviously it was a surprise and a real challenge. We knew right away, she said, that we had to get involved in the deaf community, learn about the culture, and start getting fully immersed in American Sign Language. Now, what the new parents did not know was that their neighbors in Newton, Massachusetts, would decide that they needed to start learning sign language too. The Savitzes had moved to their neighborhood. It was an enclave of about 100 houses on a peninsula in the Charles River just 3 months earlier. It's a close-knit place where many families have lived for decades. When they moved in, Glenda says a neighbor stopped by to deliver a directory of everyone who lived in the neighborhood, complete with photos and contact information. She says their next-door neighbors called themselves newbies to the area, and these newbies had lived there for 17 years. Glenda said, it gives you an idea that this is a place people do not want to leave. It's also a place where people are serious about being good neighbors. So when young Samantha was out and about with her parents, neighbors like Jill McNeil were frustrated that they could not talk to Samantha. We really wanted to communicate with her and play with her, Jill said. And since she could not learn our language, we wanted to learn hers. So Jill and 3 other neighbors, well, they quietly signed up for local adult education classes in American Sign Language. She said, so we met a teacher and we really loved him, and we asked him if he would come here and teach some more neighbors. So that's how it all started. 20 neighbors immediately signed up for the class. Now, as with any new language, learning ASL, it takes time. But Jill said the classes are working. She said, we know how to say, are you riding your bike? Or, you have pretty new pink sneakers. There's a dog across the street that Samantha loves to play with, so we all know the sign for dog. She added, her parents translate for us because her fingers are very small right now, and she signs very fast, so we're trying, and we are getting better. Her first sign to all of us is friend, which feels very good. The classes have been such a hit that there are now 2 offerings on 2 different weeknights, bringing the number of neighbors learning this language to about 40. As a result, Samantha moves with ease around the cul-de-sac where her family lives. She'll stop in at neighbors' homes just to draw pictures and to chat. Her father, Rafi, said, it's absolutely amazing that she feels so at home and they are signing to her. It's like being surrounded by family. We're just so thankful that we live here and that we are surrounded by these wonderful people, he said. Our daughter is included and she's happy. I could not think of a better situation for us and for her. And they're not the only ones who say they're grateful. Jill McNeil said, we're really enjoying the whole process, not only the learning of ASL, but the learning together. It's made our neighborhood a much closer place. Now that's a true story, but it's also a parable, and it's about you and me. It's about the kind of community that we're creating together at Salem, where strangers are welcomed, where differences are honored, and where people work together because of love and for the sake of love. Because love is what matters most. Love is stronger than anything, and love never ends. And that's how others will know us, by our love. And love is how we will know who we are.